Welcome to our PWPA Los Angeles online forum on restoring nature through a shift in consciousness. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very exciting program ahead of us. My name is Jasmine Santoro. I am one of the organizers for PWPA LA, and I will be your MC for today. But today's program is hosted by the Los Angeles chapter of Professors World Peace Academy. And to share a little bit more about who we are and what we do, we would like to share a very short video presentation. So please enjoy.
Professors World Peace Academy, or PWPA, was established on May 6, 1973 by Reverend Sum-Young Moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon, with world-renowned scholars in order to support research and activities for building a peaceful world. Back then, they saw there were many signs of the decline of America. What about drug problems? Free sex and juvenile crime problems? What about the breakdown of families? 3 out of every 4 marriages in America ended in divorce. What about racial problems and the threat of communism? Even at this moment, fierce wars and brutal massacres are going on in numerous places around the globe. Many people are suffering from the effects of climate change, environmental pollution, regional conflicts, and particularly from a confusion of values. We must fundamentally change this deplorable situation and open a new era of peace. Reverend and Mrs. Moon founded PWPA to be a trailblazing organization at this critical moment in human history to mobilize those intellectuals who have devoted their lives to the advancement of human wisdom and to enable them to play a leading role in overcoming the dangers of the age and opening new pathways to world peace. If the world is to solve its many problems, it needs leaders. The founders sincerely hope that the member scholars of PWPA will participate actively, not passively, in the search for and realization of the universal human ideals. PWPA exists not only for the advancement of the sciences, but also for the practical promotion of the well-being of humankind, thereby differing from most other scholarly institutions. PWPA is international, multidisciplinary, future-oriented, and action-oriented. The goal of PWPA is to put ideals into practice by generating new ideas by which peace can be realized and actively participating in their implementation. Mutual cooperation across national and regional boundaries and interdisciplinary studies that go beyond limited specializations are absolutely necessary. Like-minded academic professionals from various fields and disciplines have joined together in PWPA to search for truth and goodness with intellect and conscience under the goal of making a contribution to the development of a new culture for the welfare of all humankind.
Thank you to the PWPA LA media team for that video. And we would like to take this time to recognize the presence of our PWPA International President, Dr. Thomas and Grace Selover, who are joining us from Las Vegas. And we also have one of our PWPA LA Advisory Committee members, Professor Grace Apiafi, Professor at Kinesiology from Pasadena City College. Thank you for joining us today. And so for today's program, we have a very special panel with us of renowned scientists who will be speaking very shortly. But before they do so, I would like to briefly introduce each one of them. So joining us today, we have Dr. Brian D. Josephson, Professor of Physics at the University of Cambridge and a Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, and a Fellow of the Royal Society. He is a Nobel laureate in physics, and he is interested in how the mind can be properly included in physics, and has pursued this work in his Mind-Matter Unification project. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Josephson. Next, we have Dr. Lal, who will be joining the first portion of our program, and he is a distinguished professor of soil science and the director of the Rattan Lal Center for Carbon Management and Sequestration at Ohio State University. In 2021, he was ranked #1 agronomist and #1 environmental scientist by Stanford University's global ranking. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Lal. And next we have Dr. William Keepin. He holds a PhD in applied mathematics, a master's in mathematical physics, a master's in East-West psychology, and honorary doctorate from the California Institute of Integral Studies. He is the co-founder and executive director of the Satyana Institute, with his expertise in the intersection of science and spirituality. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Keepin.
Thank you.
And next we have Dr. J. Scott Jordan. He is a university professor of the Department of Psychology at Illinois State University. He is the current director of the Institute for Prospective Cognition and the Extending Empathy Project. He is also the director for ReggieCon, What's Your Story? And he has been a visiting scholar in Japan and Germany. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Jordan.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, last but certainly not least, and our main speaker for today, we have Dr. Glen Rein. After obtaining his PhD from London University, an assistant professorship at Mount Sinai Medical School, he studied various biomedical disciplines at prestigious institutes like Harvard and Stanford Medical Schools. He has extensive corporate experience at a Fortune 100 company working on innovative product development and obtaining numerous patents. He is the CEO of the Quantum Biology Research Lab and co-founder of Glee Biologics. Glee is developing aquaceuticals with structured water, nanoparticles, and frequencies of biomolecules and pharmaceuticals in accordance with the emerging field of informational pharmacology. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Rein.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, yes, to all of our panelists for being here with us today and for sharing your insight. And so for today's program, we will begin with a panel discussion on the unity of religion and science. From there, we will transition to a presentation by Dr. Glen Rein on consciousness. Then we will open the floor for questions by our audience. And our last portion of the program will be on the topic of how to amplify the natural world's restorative power, presented by a PWPA LA proposal, where we will then go into panel discussion 2 to receive feedback and think of practical implementation. So we hope today's program is inspiring, and we greatly look forward to hearing from our amazing panel. So thank you to our panelists, thank you to our professors joining us through Zoom, and we also have a greater audience joining us through live stream, so thank you for being here with us today. And so to start, we would like to go into our first panel discussion. So I will invite up each panelist, and if you could share your response. And once all of our panelists have shared, I'll open the floor for the panel to then go into further discussion if you have a response and would like to go back and forth a bit more. But for our first panel question, throughout history, religion and science have often been seen as opposing forces, one speaking to faith, the other to reason. But perhaps they were never meant to be divided. And today, we want to explore what becomes possible when these two dimensions of truth begin to work together. So the question we would like to ask is, why is the unity of religion and science essential for the progress of humanity in this age? So if we can invite up all of our panelists, you will all be spotlighted. And while they're being spotlighted, if I can first invite up Dr. Josephson for your response and thoughts to this question.
Right, well, I've been involved, well, most of what I've been doing has been connecting physics and biology because I sense that physics has been not missing things out. In particular, John Wheeler talked of observer participancy. He thought that observers, well, quantum physics says that observers collapse the wave function. They observe something, and that's what happens. I've been trying to extend this basically. But I think this unified view might allow for observers from afar, including the religious side, so it may connect science and religion. In fact, I didn't find it when I was looking today, but I did There's a paper published in Physics Education on unifying science and religion. That was many years ago. I published that. I can't remember what I said. So that's my response.
Thank you so much, Dr. Josephson. And next, if I can ask Dr. Rattan, would you like to share your response and your thoughts to this question?
It's a great pleasure to be here present and listening to very distinguished philosophers and scientists on this topic of restoring nature through a shift in consciousness. So I would like to emphasize that nature has 4 components: soil, water, air, and biodiversity. And because of the growing population, 8.2 billion now, human population, and destined to be 9.5 or 9.7 billion by 2050, another quarter of a century, and perhaps more than 11 billion by the end of this century, by 2100. The demands of humanity on natural resources, soil, water, air, biodiversity, are tremendous. According to some estimates, 40% of the soils are already degraded by erosion, salinization, depletion of organic matter, elemental imbalance, and other issues. So the question is, how can the most precious and finite resource on which all life depends, soil, can be judiciously managed, protected, restored, so that it can thrive and flourish? Because sustainable use of soil resources is very critical, and we cannot take it for granted. So soil and spirituality, from my perspective, I would like to extend that idea: soil, spirituality, soul, and stewardship. All those 4 components linked together. And this is where the topic being discussed today is of great significance and very timely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lal, for sharing your insight. And next, if we can ask Dr. William Keepin, what are your thoughts on this question?
Thank you. And is it possible for me to screen share?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason that it's important to bring science and spirituality together is because the spirituality is the science of a cosmic interbeing. It is the foundation, in my understanding, of what so-called quantum entanglement is all about. But I think of it more as quantum interbeing. But very briefly, beginning with David Bohm, who many of you are familiar with. David Bohm was a colleague of Einstein's, who basically developed a theory after 50 years of researching quantum physics and spirituality and bringing it together. He came up with the theory of what he called the holo movement. The cosmos is a single unbroken wholeness and flowing movement in which everything is connected to everything else. Now that holo part refers to holographic or fractal structure. Fractals, as I think most of you know, are essentially a modern scientific discovery of the ancient Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without. We have them all around us in the natural world. In a fern, the idea is that a small part of the structure is a miniature replica of the entire structure. So you can see that in the case of a fern. It's very elegant in the case of a Romanesque broccoli. Each nodule on that broccoli is a miniature manifestation of the entire broccoli. There's a close-up of the surface of the broccoli. It goes down to the tiniest scale. Each part encompasses the totality of the whole. This is the structure of fractals, or sometimes they're called self-similar structures or scale invariance. Scale invariance meaning if you look at a tree, for example, you take just a branch from that tree, it has the same structure as a trunk with its own mini branches. Similarly with lightning, similarly with the circulation, this is the human eye. You can see the blood vessels in the eyeball. They have a similar, self-similar patterning of a fractal pattern. We see it with the trachea and the lungs. So all of these are examples of fractals, the most basic example of which is the Mandelbrot set. Most of you have seen this, I'm sure. It's a plot of a nonlinear iterative process in the two-dimensional plane, but it has this unique feature if you magnify it. So if we dive in and just magnify it very quickly, right at the top there, and we keep going, and we're going about an order of magnitude each time, we finally come to an exact replica, hundreds of millions of times smaller within the original. This is the nature of holographic or fractal structures. And my belief, my conviction is that consciousness itself has a fractal structure, and that this actually explains the foundations of mysticism. For example, the great poet Rumi, who said, "The secret turning in your heart makes the entire universe turn." And this is not just a metaphor. Rumi is speaking literally about the ontological nature of consciousness. So we have a direct parallel here between the mathematical fractal and the spiritual fractal, if you will. On the right is that little formula that I mentioned, the nonlinear iterative process that gives rise to the Mandelbrot set in the plane of mathematics. There's a direct parallel in the spiritual process where there's a spiritual seed which gives birth to all of creation. We see this testified in the Bhagavad Gita, where God, in the form of Krishna, claims, "I am the original seed. I am the origin of everything. From me all proceeds. My eternal seed is found in every creature." We find the same thing essentially in the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Logos. The Logos was with God. The Logos, through the Logos, all things were made. So there's this process, east and west, of a fractal seed that gives birth to all of existence. Applying that to all the religions, we see a common superstructure across the great wisdom traditions of humanity, where there's the absolute plane, then there's the plane of divinity, which is an esoteric structure, whether it's the Hindu Trinity, the Christian Trinity, or Allah and the 99 names, or Sambhogakaya, across the traditions. And then in the creation plane, where you have each of these traditions. The central problem with science today is it still is primarily restricted to a science of the creation plane, and it's missing all of this verticality. And that verticality is replicated inside each human being. Every human being is an epistemological instrument that replicates the entire cosmic process and drama within the small frame of a human being. And this is the full glory and majesty of the human being. But it requires that we go beyond merely the mind to inhabit the fullness of this bio-spiritual galaxy that each one of us is. This is reflected also in the image of Indra's net, which I won't go into, but the bottom line is what I like to call the internet of the heart. Each of us can access the full infinity of divinity through our own hearts and bodies. So the summary of all this is that you as a human being are not just a drop from the infinite ocean. You are the infinite ocean contained in a single drop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keepin, for that presentation. Yeah, and for your answer on that question. And yes, we're actually going to connect back to that in the Hollow movement a little bit later too. But
Great.
Next, if I can invite up Dr. Glen Rein for your answer and thoughts to this question.
Hi, folks. So that's a great question. And I would actually take a rather different perspective and say that, in fact, in essence, the science and religion do have a lot in common. And I want to look at that answer in two ways. If you look at a universal perspective, and we can conclude that in religion, of course, God is the source. Now, in science, they also have a source, but it's a different name. They give it a different name, and that name is either the quantum or the vacuum. And these two essences are from which all things arise. In the case, so period, right? Okay. In the case of a human being, I think the similar situation occurs, that the what they have in common is, in religion they would call it a soul, and in science you have this fundamental energy of consciousness. Well, let's call that consciousness, from which all things arise. So my perspective is that really they are united. They're just calling everything, they're giving everything a different name, but the concepts suggest that they are on the same page.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rein, for that explanation. Yeah, thank you so much. And next, if I can invite up Dr. Jordan to share your response to this question.
Thank you very much for that great question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Thank you. And so usually I give talks from rooms and auditoriums, but today I'm sitting outside of a Starbucks. I had to go on the road for a family reason, but my answer to this question would be looking at the cosmos, reality, whatever we want to call it, as an internally related unity. This is an idea that was popular in German philosophy in the mid 1800s, in the sense that I think the science is kind of there. And the science is the idea of energy transformation. So an ecologist by the name of Odom argued that what we are energy transformation systems sustaining ourselves within an energy transformation hierarchy or cosmos. And the reason I think thinking of ourselves as being self-sustaining energy transformers as opposed to physical mental or physical spiritual beings, I think the advantage of conceptualizing ourselves as self-sustaining energy transformers is then we never get to ignore the entropy of being. In other words, for us to exist in an energy transformation reality, some things have to be consumed. Things have to be broken down. And I sometimes get concerned that the division between the spirituality and body, or whatever dualism we want to use, allows us to avoid the natural entropy generating nature of what we are. And I think when we can shift to conceptualizing ourselves as Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu all in one, then we recognize that our being costs the context that we are in. And then we can start to look at how do we manage the entropy costs of our being. And I think then we can start to entertain we're here. I don't think there's a transcendent realm to which where there is no contingency and no entropy. And I think thinking ourselves in this way will give us a more straightforward way of addressing the entropy challenges we've created for the context that we're in. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan, for joining us, even being on the road and joining us. We really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And so, yeah, now we'd like to open the space for discussion. And would any of our panelists like to add on to what was said or shared by your fellow panelists, or have anything you would like to add to this discussion and to this question?
Well, one thing that well, some of the people I'm working with have a very similar viewpoint, and they would perhaps have done better here than I am. But the other thing I'd like to mention is that the problems civilization face may well be addressed by one of my interests, which is cold fusion or low energy nuclear actions. It's extraordinary the way it's been sort of blotted out. You just can't mention it and explain what's happening. But the fact is that progress is being made, and in the next couple of years, you may be able to buy something to power your house just using, say, hydrogen or nickel as a fuel. So we have to wait for that. I'm in contact with people concerned, and I think there's a possibility that well, my college is interested actually, because they're thinking of the future, and they expect them to be looking into it as well.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. Yeah, I look forward to that day too. We can have that energy in our house. And I see Dr. Lal, you would like to add on too?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the comments made by Dr. Keepin of Bhagavad Gita and Dr. Rein on linking Brahma, Vishnu, and Hamesh into one God. I want to say something about Gita because I'm very familiar with the so-called the epic of was fought at a place called Kurukshetra, and that is where the warrior lord Arjuna refused to fight with his cousins, and the god Krishna appears to him as his chariot driver, and he explains to him what his duties are. And Arjuna replied to him, "First tell me, who are you?" And he said, "I'm the god." And then Arjuna asked again, "What do you mean by God?" And Krishna explains, essentially, God is nature, rivers, mountains, vegetation, wildlife. So that is a sense of Bhagavad Gita, that God is nature. And the second part, which is important, mentioned that there are 8.4 million forms of life. I do not know how did Bhagavad Gita writer thousands of years ago estimated 8.4 million form, but the current estimate is about 7 million at the scientific estimate. And the theory of karma, he explained, is that one life form changes into another, lowest to the highest, highest being human being. And if you do the bad karma, then you start from the lower form of life once again. And that essentially means protecting the nature. Does not matter whom you meet, you never know in what form guide may be present, and therefore do not hurt anyone or do not offend anybody, because nature is the God. And in my views, I have studied soil science, and we find that soil is the basis of all terrestrial life. And it's a living entity. So, A, that any living entity has rights to be protected, restored, and managed properly. And B, that it is in our best karma to make sure that we treat it properly. And therefore, I do agree with comments made by Dr. Keepin and Rein that their philosophy, all are one, and God says, "I'm the one," as Krishna says. So that is a great link of science and spirituality, consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. And before we move on, I just wanted to make a note to all of our audience members. After our next presentation, we will have a question and answer session. So please remember your questions, write it down if you need to, and at that time, we'll give the opportunity for our audience members to also ask questions to our panelists. But next, I see Dr. Keepin. Would you like to add on?
Just a short comment about the Bhagavad Gita, because it's also a scripture that's very dear to my heart as well. And I know that Dr. Josephson has worked with the Gita, at least in context of transcendental meditation, from what I read on Wikipedia. I believe he got in trouble for bringing in the Gita in a scientific context, at least what I saw on Wikipedia. I've certainly had the same problem at
I
times.
gave a lecture course on Mauritius Science of Creative Intelligence once. That was okay. Have more trouble on things connected with memory of water. The head of the department tried to block it, say I couldn't allow this lecture to be given. Of course, I ignored that, and the department survived despite the fears of the head of departments. Homeopathy.
I just want to acknowledge, because I've known of your work for years, and I know that you've spoken to many undiscussables in the scientific context, and I'm deeply grateful for that, because it's really important. I just wanted to point out in the Gita that whole understanding of all of creation is contained in the self. The self is contained of all of creation, and all of creation is contained in the self, that identity, that fractal identity that I was speaking of earlier. And the last thing I'll say is that the first teaching of Krishna in chapter 2 is that human consciousness survives physical death, and that the person does not die when the body dies. And this is something that science is now, only now, with the near-death experience, finally beginning to seriously entertain. So in that sense, science has more than 2,000 years of catch-up to do, to where at least some aspects of the scriptural truths have known about certain things that science is now only just barely beginning to discover.
Thank you, Dr. Keepin, for that additional point. I think that's an important point. And would anyone else from our panelists like to add on, or any other thoughts that came to mind?
If I may say a couple of words about Dr. Keepin's philosophy, which I really admire and excellent. Going back to Gita, in which Lord Krishna explains that Atma, and I should say the word Atma means soul in Sanskrit, the word Atma. So that's where the Atma, Mahatma, like Gandhi, the great soul, that's where Mahatma, and then Paramatma, that's the supreme soul, which is the God. So those three things, Atma, Mahatma, and Paramatma, are related to what the deeds, scientific deeds, are deeds of how to maintain nature come in very. And the other part, which is important, that is that Atma, the way we say it in Sanskrit, in Hindi, that Atma never dies. It is the body that dies, and body keep changing shape depending upon your karma. So I think that concept of explained here is very important, that how Atma, Paramatma, and Mahatma are interlinked together with God, asking us, the disciples, to do the best we can to protect nature.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. Thank you so much. And Dr. Jordan, would you still like to share too and add on?
What I'd quickly like to do is just talk about the idea of conceptualizing ourselves as self-sustaining energy transformers means that we can conceptualize ourselves as embodiments of the context, embodiments of the energy gradients within which we sustain ourselves, which means that the brain, the skeleton, the teeth of the muscles of a lion can be conceptualized as the embodiment of the constraints of sustaining oneself on the energy encapsulated in the zebras. The reason I go through all those words is because it means that all systems we call living are naturally and necessarily about the context they've embodied, which means that now we can look at our entirety of being as being embodied aboutness. So then we can, in the work that I do, then this embodied aboutness is what I would call spirituality. And then we can look at cultivating our aboutness, becoming more mindful about our aboutness, becoming more and more about our aboutness. And this then makes us more about the world's aboutness, the cosmos aboutness. And this way of thinking, for me at least, lets me integrate the humanities, science, and then talk of spirituality in relation to talk of body. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. Thank you so much. And would any of our panelists like to make any final comments before we move to the presentation? Okay. Thank you so much for all the insightful comments. We will have one more panel discussion later in the program, but thank you for answering this question. And yeah, I think this is an important discussion that we'll continue to have and continue to develop. Thank you for sharing your insights. And so before we go into our next presentation on the energetic mechanisms associated with raising consciousness by Dr. Rein, we would like to highlight that PWPA co-founders, Dr. Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Jahan Moon's vision was that the unity of religion and science may hold the key to addressing the social issues we face in the modern age, including our most urgent environmental challenges. In our recent PWPA LA conference, it was discussed that the environmental damage we witness today is not merely the result of technological misuse. It's a byproduct of the state of human consciousness. And over the past few centuries, humanity has experienced extraordinary scientific progress and technological innovation, leading to material comfort. Yet this same era has seen a decline in moral and ethical awareness. The misuse of power and technology to exploit nature, therefore, is not only an ecological issue, but a moral one. But the desire to create a better living environment originates from the human's heart longing for joy and happiness. However, the way we've allowed our consciousness to direct our behaviors has often been misaligned. Instead of expressing love and stewardship toward creation, it is turned toward domination and exploitation. And this current state of human consciousness has become the fundamental cause of our environmental crisis. And this misalignment has disrupted the interconnectedness of all things. To find a solution, we must ask whether consciousness exists not only in human beings, but throughout the universe itself. If it exists and is responsible for the interconnectedness of all entities, it could serve as a model for transforming human consciousness. As Dr. Keepin mentioned and shared about, renowned physicist Dr. David Bohm described this as the hollow movement, the idea that the universe is an unbroken wholeness of matter, energy, and consciousness. Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Jahan Moon articulate in Unification Thought, that's the philosophical framework developed by them, that this interconnected reality originates from a cosmic consciousness, the primordial subject consciousness that imparts life, order, and purpose to all beings. However, human consciousness has become disengaged from this cosmic consciousness, and this separation distorts our perception and behavior, leading to actions that disrupt the natural harmony of life. Therefore, the most fundamental solution is not merely technological innovation, but a transformation of human consciousness. They believe that when religion, offering moral purpose, and science, revealing the mechanisms through which creation unfolds, are united, this unity creates the foundation for a deeper transformation. Through this renewed integration, human consciousness can realign with the origin of consciousness itself, enabling a more coherent and ethical response to humanity's challenges. And so with this in mind, it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, who will explore more deeply on raising consciousness, the inner transformation essential for restoring harmony between humanity and the universe. So our main speaker today has been doing a lot of research on this topic, and he has great insights to share. So if you can help me welcome up Dr. Glen Rein, who will be speaking on energetic mechanisms associated with raising a consciousness. Thank you, Dr. Rein.
You'll see something regarding that's in the 1970s. I went to a conference organized by the Unification Church, and Sun Myung Moon was there. So I have had a long connection with your organization. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. We were amazed when we looked back at some of the, it was ICUS, right, in the 70s, and we saw your name
Yes.
there. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for joining
Sorry
us.
to have interrupted.
Oh, thank you. No problem.
Okay, so in light of the previous conversation about shifting consciousness and transforming consciousness, I want to use a different word, and that's raise consciousness. And basically, I'd like to discuss how, what happens in the body and in the mind when we do raise our consciousness. And the obvious way to do that, of course, is through meditation. But here's my contact information for anybody who wants to follow up. Happy to answer further questions. Okay. Okay. So there's my information again, unhidden. But hiding is a great word, because consciousness is hidden from the body, and I want to talk about the relationship between the physical, chemical body and the energetic body, which I use as a synonym for consciousness. But I'm going to start with since we've been talking a lot of about Hindu philosophy and Shiva and Shakti. This is a model describing the multiple layers energetic layers that exist between the body and God within. On the left, entitled the Creator or the Source. And as you can see, this is based on Kashmir Shaivism, which has actually 34 different levels, energetic levels between the physical body and God within. And you can see that the mind is about halfway up that scale. So the mind is obviously a key method of accessing our higher realities and our source consciousness and our soul. the point I want to make here is that there's two directions that energy information or can flow, either up or down. And one is called involution and one is called evolution. And basically, I'm going to talk about both, but particularly involution, because in order to raise our consciousness, I believe we have to bring in divine energy into our bodies, into our consciousness. In fact, in Eastern traditions, in Kashmir Shaivism at least, they describe consciousness as all of these levels that are depicted here. So consciousness is not just in the mind. Consciousness is the entire spectrum of energies. And now energies, not physical body. So we have the physical body there, but the physical body, actually, I'm correcting myself. They would consider the physical body as part of consciousness as well. So that's a quick summary. This is another slide with the same thing. And these kind of slides are basically put together by what's called the mystery schools, at least in America. And but nonetheless, I want to bring in the science to combine it with the mystery schools. So here I want to define nature as the primordial energy of the universe, which I think one of our speakers has already mentioned in the introduction. So I have 4 questions here. How do we connect to this divine energy? How can we resonate with this divine energy? To what extent do we resonate with it? And can we bring our consciousness up into this higher dimensional reality? And are we able to absorb this kind of energy into our physical bodies? And if I can answer any one of these questions, it would be a major achievement, but I'm going to try to answer them all. And the way I view the energetic nature of reality is described here in terms of layers of consciousness, a bit like David Bohm's model here. And the explicit order would be the physical, and the 3 energy levels that I've depicted here would be the implicate order. And I use this model normally to describe the relationship between a healer and a healee, to say how energy is transferred at all these different levels. But the same model that I use for healing can also be used to describe nature and the relationship between the individual and nature, because nature has all of these levels, energetic levels, as well as the human body. So what we're talking about is a resonance and ultimately a flow of information from consciousness or source or God within out into the physical by virtue of the quantum energy level and the electromagnetic level energy levels. So this requires what I call transduction of energy, and which Dr. Scott Jordan talked about energy transformation. It's the same idea. So here is that concept in a little more detail. Scalar energy is a form of electromagnetic energy. The audience may not be aware of that. It's kind of a higher order electromagnetic energy than electromagnetics. We know that the physical body is very much linked to the electromagnetic fields in the body, because the body is electrochemical in nature, and electrical energy and electromagnetic energy are really what makes the body run. But I'm proposing here that there's a hierarchy of many levels, 34 according to Kashmir Shaivism, that have to be down converted into less subtle, more dense energies until we get into the electromagnetic domain, which is the domain that the physical body relates to, understands, and responds to. So, having said all that, these different levels and different energies have been described by many different systems. I mean, even in ancient China, they talk about the five elements. In the New Age, we use that term loosely. We have the second column, where we have the astral plane and things and causal planes, and then there's been several books written, particularly by J.J. Hertog, called The Keys of Enoch. Enoch was some kind of a god, shall we say, maybe small g, not big G, who described 5 different energy levels. And in Indian philosophy, we have 5 different koshas. So these are more words to describe what I've already described in more detail. So as I said in my introduction, for me, the $1 million question is, how do you get 5-dimensional energies, higher dimensional energies, all the way up to God, into our body? And as I said earlier, meditation is the obvious way, but people who meditate often have a teacher. And if the guru or the teacher has a higher energy, then they can transmit that into our body and raise our energy from the electromagnetic domain, which it normally functions, into the higher order energies. And we can also do that by ourselves. We don't need an external guru to do that, but that's one way to do it. We can do that through sound and chanting. We can do and sacred music, which is in a Western science approach, has been described in the context of Fibonacci frequencies and solfeggio frequencies that make up the music. We can also raise our consciousness by looking at mandalas, which is obviously a technique that's used in India, because the energy coming off of these sacred geometric patterns can actually help raise our consciousness. We can also do this through ingesting food and water that have been imbued with these higher forms of energy. So, okay, that's an overview of how we can raise our energies. So let's talk a little bit more about the down conversion process, because as I said in my introduction, we've got higher dimensional energies which have to be brought down into the electromagnetic domain in order for the body to be able to understand and relate to it. And I'm going to talk about 3 different mechanisms, how this occurs, through the catenoid, the toroid, and a wormhole, which is a geometric structure that actually can convert higher dimensional reality into lower dimensional energies. Phase conjugation is another concept in physics that also allows us to convert a laser, which is ordinary light, admittedly with quantum properties, into higher forms of light energy. And that process occurs both ways. So it can go from higher dimensional energies into lower energies and vice versa. And the idea of sacred geometric networks and grids, which have information of their own and can also be used to help raise our consciousness. Okay, so if we look in a little more detail about, I mean, I could probably spend the whole half an hour just on that one slide. But so let's look at direct versus indirect kind of energy down conversion. And the way I look at all this is that the biofield, or the energy of the body, is what resonates with the other energies, the higher forms of energy that I've been mentioning. And the the biofield itself is composed of all the energies that I described in my model much earlier in this talk. So the biofield contains electromagnetic energy for sure, but it also contains quantum energy and divine energy. It's all there. So then the question is, how do we, in order to convert four-dimensional energy, electromagnetic energy, into higher forms of energy, we need to bring in the 5D energy into the body. So that's one way to do it. Now, the other way to do it is through physical, well, I'm sorry. So two things going on here. It's the energies of the body that have to be raised into the higher order, higher dimensional energy of divine energy. But these kind of changes also can occur in the physical body, in the electrochemical body, by virtue of phase transitions. And this is a key concept, which allows me as a scientist to talk about how the phase shift can occur. And in fact, new phases can appear in the physical body. And in the physics literature, they have this really fascinating description called hidden order transitions. Now this is a kind of phase transition where a new order is created, and that this order, like David Bohm talked about, implicate order, but this new order cannot be measured by conventional science and is therefore called hidden. So in summary, we have physical chemical changes going on in the physical body and energetic changes. Now I'm going to shift and focus mostly on the energetic side of the equation, although I am a biochemist by training. I think that the energetic changes are more fundamental and important. So here's another model that I've developed where the energy comes in the crown. This is divine energy that comes into the crown, goes down the Sushumna, which is a term used in the Indian philosophy. And the Sushumna is a channel down the center of the spine. And the energy can travel up and down this central channel, and that when it reaches the coccyx, it kind of splits and goes up the Ida and Pingala, which is also described in the Hindu philosophy. And that as this energy goes up the Ida and Pingala back up to the crown, it radiates kind of a subtle energy, whether we call it five-dimensional energy, virtual energy, scalar energy, or quantum energy. These are subtle forms of energy which allows the electromagnetic component to become higher order. Okay, and when that happens, we create what's called the light body. Okay, so mechanisms. Let's look exactly about how that can actually happen. And so we're going to start with wormholes because, believe it or not, transversible wormholes is a concept that's in the physics literature. Transversible meaning that you can travel through the wormhole from one end to the other. This is actually also described as hypersurfaces in Riemann curvatures, which is a concept in physics. But the concept I want to focus on is the catenoid, because the catenoid, as you can see in the picture here, is the center of a wormhole, which is actually a toroid. And in the physics literature, they talk about the mouth, the throat of the wormhole, which is an interesting concept because that's where the energy first comes in. And they describe it in the physics literature as negative energy, a bit like Dirac used that term. So these basic fundamental concepts are in the physics literature. And here's a depiction of a catenoid inside of a toroid, in the center of a toroid, which I'm proposing can actually down convert divine energy into ordinary electromagnetic energy which I'm calling here 4-dimensional, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. And here is a depiction of the toroid with the catenoid. And it turns out, so this is in the physics literature, it turns out in the biology literature, the concept of, the shape of a toroid, certain biomolecules take on the shape of a toroid, in specific DNA. And there are electron micrographs published in the biological literature showing toroid DNA in the shape of a toroid. It's also called supercoiled DNA. And I guess the problem that I have is with biologists is they don't know the function of the toroidal DNA. So although they describe here in this particular reference from 2009, the fact that there is a cascade of transitions between different toroidal states. So not only can the toroid itself convert one kind of energy into another, it itself undergoes transitions from one type of toroid to another. And yes, I said all this. So here in the bottom left, there's actually an electron microscope photograph of two toroidal DNA molecules connected by a single strand or a double strand of DNA. And in my model, I'm proposing that this toroidal DNA can function to actually down convert divine energy into usable electromagnetic energy. Okay, so, and this was actually published. That theory is based on another theory I have about geometric resonances of DNA, and I don't really have time to go into that in too much detail, other than to say that the DNA and biomolecules in general can exist in different geometric conformations. Okay, so having said all that, I have only 10 more minutes. So I want to, I basically said this and I've said this. And now I want to talk a little bit about phase conjugation, which is another mechanism for converting higher dimensional energies into ordinary energy. And here on the left, we have a regular mirror, which can bounce light off of it. And that the light that comes in and the light that bounces off of this mirror is similar. But in a phase conjugation mirror, the light that is reflected off of the mirror goes back to source. And this is the terminology they use. You can see the picture here. This is exactly what we talk about in the spiritual world. That energy goes back to source, that we need to bring our consciousness and our energies back to source, back to God. And in the physics literature, when they describe phase conjugation and they describe the light energy, so the input energy is normally a laser beam, and they describe the reflected light that comes back off of this surface as time reversed virtual energy. Well, time reversed and virtual are two words that apparently the physics people are okay with describing higher order energies. And as I said earlier, this phenomenon of phase conjugation is reversible. So it can convert 4D into 5D and 5D into 4D. So phase conjugation. So then the question becomes, where is the phase conjugation mirror in the body? And there are lots of theories that are out there. And my particular theory is based on the last one, the quantum chemical properties of biomolecules, because there have been two publications demonstrating that certain biomolecules that contain porphyrins do in fact exhibit phase conjugation behavior. And that is the point that this phenomena can occur in the physical body. So it's not just theory. I mean, it's not just physics. This phenomena occurs in the body as well. So here's a porphyrin, complex porphyrin structure with, they usually have a cationic metal in the center to create this kind of special effect. And the function of porphyrins is interesting and having to do with a semiconductor and electron tunneling. So it has kind of like quantum properties as well. And this is a particular interest to me. And I published this theory that phase conjugation can act, as I have been talking about for the last 20 minutes, in this context, and that it is the holographic interference patterns on the phase conjugation mirror, which allows energy to be transmuted, decoded, modulated, transformed, and brought to higher dimensional reality. Okay, so having talked about that, I do want to talk a little bit about my own research. I'm going to run out of time. So geometric patterns are as associated with yantras and mandalas are another way to raise consciousness. And geometric patterns, it turns out, do emit an energy of their own. And this is what I call subtle energy. And here's a reference to that in the biology literature, talking about higher order molecular organization. So there is some rigorous scientist associated with this idea, but I want to talk about my own research and how these kind of energies affect DNA. Neuronal network, here's some nice pictures to show you of these kind of geometric patterns, but specifically I want to talk about how these patterns can affect the body. And here's a quote from a book by J.J. Hertak, which I quoted preliminarily, and basically saying that an evolutionary shift can occur as a result of shifts in the grid. The geometric patterns themselves shift and can actually cause changes in our consciousness. Okay, so here, finally, we're getting to the experimental data. I only have 5 minutes. I'm going to talk about my experiments with DNA. And I've done several different kinds of experiments measuring DNA synthesis, measuring winding and unwinding of the two strands, measuring the electrical properties of DNA, and measuring the frequency spectra of DNA. Obviously, in 5 minutes, I don't have time to talk all about this, but the fact that DNA can act as an antenna and be sensitive to these various forms of subtle energy, I actually proposed back in '96, but Martin Blank published it in a real journal back in 2011. So there is some scientific rationale for this. These are, okay, so here's a specific experiment that I'm going to talk about where I actually place DNA in a test tube on top of these two-dimensional geometric shapes and inside a three-dimensional shape like that. And I measure before and after. And here's an experiment where I measured the winding and unwinding of the two strands of DNA, which can be measured experimentally by measuring the absorption of a chromophore inside the helix. The more open and unwound the DNA becomes, the more it absorbs energy, and the more trapped inside of the closed conformation, the less it absorbs. And here, pattern number 1 and pattern number 2, just to refresh your memory. These are two-dimensional patterns, the golden mean spiral and a very complex triangular shape. They do, in fact, change the conformation of DNA. And what's interesting, that they have the opposite effect. And I've seen this a lot looking at the effects of various forms of energy on DNA and water, that some energies increase the conductivity, for example, and other energies decrease the conductivity. So, okay, so here's another kind of geometry that I've studied. It's a commercially available, or it was commercially available, machine that you can see, which spins. So the geometric shape on the left actually spins. And you put this thing above your head, above your crown chakra, and they actually did a lot of scientific questionnaires, psychological questionnaires, measuring people's emotional state and even their spiritual state. Believe it or not, there is a questionnaire these days that allows you to measure the degree of spirituality, the degree to which you are connected to source. And these are some of the results. I only did the DNA part, but when this machine actually increases your focus and your emotional balance and mental clarity and all these things, all associated with greater states of consciousness. And my research in this particular situation was to actually measure the DNA, the frequencies of DNA. And here we have the results that show that the conductivity of DNA increases, and this phenomena occurs specifically at 1.4 kilohertz, which itself is a resonance frequency of the DNA molecule. So there is a rather large increase of electrical conductivity at that specific wavelength. Okay, frequency. So I've got a lot of other experiments that I've done with healers, and I don't have time to show you that, but healers, under the assumption that healers generate ordinary electromagnetic energy, yes, but also higher order divine energies. And you can see that there are various changes that I don't really have time to talk about. Here's another example where the healer can change the frequencies of DNA, which I've already mentioned before. But notice that depending on the frequency, the electrical conductivity of the DNA can either be the same, go down, or increase. So this is a complex phenomena that we're talking about. I have developed a technique to actually help people visualize what's going on. But in essence, what it involves is visualizing the DNA collapsing into a toroid and visualizing the energy going in and out of a toroid. So that's the 30 minutes. My time's up. So here's my contact information again. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present some of my ideas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rein. Thank you for your presentation. It was very in-depth, and thank you for sharing about your research. We know there's many years of investment into this research, and so we thank you for sharing that with us today. And so I'm sure from that presentation, there are many questions. And so we want to take this time to open the floor for a question and answer session with our audience members. So if you can raise your hand, I'll call on you. And please let us know who you're directing the question towards. It can be from Dr. Rein's presentation, or if you had any questions from the earlier panel. But yes, we'll try to answer each question as time allows. But yes, do any of our audience members or panelists have any questions they would like to ask?
Yes, I really want to thank Dr. Rein for an outstanding presentation, certainly opening up my eyes to a whole lot beyond what I normally work with, which is looking at things like the energy balance for the planet Earth, with energy coming from the sun, of course, in different wavelengths, um, and the idea that the atmosphere is transparent for visible light to the electromagnetic energy of visible light, but in fact is somewhat opaque to the longer wavelengths of, say, infrared energy. And I'm just wondering whether these traditional ways of looking at energy transport have any kind of analog when we're talking about higher forms of energy and how that energy moves around, where that energy is spatially, because obviously, by bringing physicality into the picture, which we have to do if we want to understand climate change, that makes an understanding of several different levels of energy, 34 levels of energy, very, very complex. I'm just wondering, is there any thought about the physical location and how this energy moves around?
Well, so the first part of that question was about conventional energies and how they penetrate the body or don't. And I mean, I've been part of the Bioelectromagnetic Society for many years, and they obviously have their own ideas about how electromagnetic energy propagates through the body and where it's localized and how it functions. But the the higher order energies that I'm talking about don't apparently use the same mechanism. And the reason is because in the electromagnetic domain, the properties of electromagnetic fields are described by Maxwell's equations. And the kind of energies that I'm talking about are not described by Maxwell's equations. Maybe Schrodinger's equations, or maybe even equations we don't even know about yet, because quantum energy, although quantum processes have been described in the body, this is a new discipline called quantum biology. They do acknowledge that quantum processes like photosynthesis do exist in the body, but they do not really talk about quantum energy fields. And I'd love to get some feedback from the rest of the physicists in this speaker list here. So the idea that divine energy is beyond quantum energy leaves us completely perplexed about how this kind of energy functions in the body, where it's localized, and it basically the question that's being asked. And the only thing I can say to that is that I believe that there are higher dimensional properties. Certain molecules like DNA, for example, have quantum properties. And if they have quantum properties, then they probably have higher order energies associated with them. And I'm a biologist, not a physicist. So exactly how these energies are utilized by the body, as far as I know, maybe Dr. Josephson has some other ideas, is unknown at this point.
Well, there's a field of biology known as biosemiosis, which is how information has meaning, and I think that answers your question. There's a very nice paper by someone called Barbieri, who goes into detail as to why it's something additional to conventional understanding. I'm not too sure what I can say about it. It's also connected with coordination dynamics, in that there are units called synergies, which are studied by can be studied in the brain where information has functional properties. So in other words, we're talking about a special kind of organization which physicists don't know about, and I'm interested in studying it.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But you may have gone beyond where we've got. I don't know. I think these people, as I mentioned, really more into this than me, and they should have been giving this here talking about their insights. But anyway.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rein, Dr. Josephson. Thank you, Dr. Davidson, for your question. That was a really good question. And I see, Dr. Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Great.
I'm out here in the wind because it's too loud in the coffee shop. Thanks, Glenn. Thank Dr. Ryan. Thanks for that important talk. The question I have is, I completely copacetic with the idea of different types, different scales of energy. I'm very in tune with the idea of investigating things, particularly as it relates to the way we might consider dealing with climate change. The question I have is, when we label one of those energies a divine, I'm wondering, and to what extent we're sort of placing a valence on levels of energy. And I'm wondering if it leads to an assumption that achieving the divine, sorry, my coffee's the wrong way, is what will help us with the climate change. And the reason is, if we're going to believe that everything's about everything, if we're going to believe that we're fractal embodiments of reality, then all of it's divine, right? All of it is naturally and necessarily about. All of it is all of it is naturally and necessarily meaningful. I would argue there is nothing that is meaningless. So sometimes I wonder where we're going to put our efforts when it comes to understanding what we are and what we're in, when it comes to dealing with climate change and using notions of the divine as something that might, I don't know, I'll stop there.
Okay, so I totally agree with what you just said, and that's consistent with the Hindu philosophy that, I use the term divine, but we could also use the term consciousness. We could use lots of different terms, but it's the most subtle, if you will. Go back to David Bohm. It's the most subtle of all forms of energy, at the center of the implicate order. And in fact, it was David Bohm who talked about layers within the implicate order. I'm just giving those layers a little more detailed description. But the fact that divine energy is present in all matter and in all other forms of energy is certainly been stated in the Hindu philosophy. But to what extent that's acknowledged by physicists, I'm not sure, but I totally agree with you that the divine energy is always present in all forms of energy and all forms of matter. But the practicality of that is that, that energy is there, but how do we utilize it? How do we access it? And how can we resonate with it to help raise our consciousness? That was the theme of my talk.
Thank you, Dr. Rein. And I see Dr. Keepin would like to add on. Or...
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Rein, for that very illuminating presentation. And I really greatly appreciate the effort to articulate more detail about these various levels of consciousness and levels of energy. I have two questions. One is just about what you refer to as 5D and 4D. I assume the D refers to dimensions.
Yes.
But I'm
yes.
sure. Okay. So then we're moving into higher dimensional realities in some sense, that go beyond. Those aren't geometric Euclidean type dimensions, are they? Or are they perhaps? So that's just a little more about the ontology of those dimensions, if you have it. And then secondly, I'm assuming that lot of what you're mapping out is already there in like the Kashmir Shaivism system. Is that correct? Essentially, and I think there's probably equivalent systems. I know, for example, the central channel is there in the Taoist system. It's there in the Tibetan Buddhist system. Tibetan Buddhist system has 5 chakras rather than 7 typically. These are mapped out in different ways, but they all have certain things in common. And one of them is that there is a central channel and that there is these energy currents that take place in the central channel, and that is foundational to realizing these higher states of awareness. And also that as that central channel is activated, it also eventually grows kind of perpendicular to the length and expands. And that's how the consciousness expands to include the various levels of the cosmic reality. I think it was Ajit Mukherjee, the Tibetan Buddhist who's scholar practitioner, who said, if you come to know the deep secrets or deepest secrets of the body, you come to know the deepest secrets of the universe. And he's really speaking to exactly what you're saying. The body is literally a fractal instantiation
Right.
of the kind of energy and consciousness structure of the entire cosmos,
Right.
which is really incredibly important. And that alone, I would say, is the answer to the question, why do we need to bring science and spirituality together? Because we need to do that to flesh out the fullness of the nature of reality itself and the nature of the human being ourselves. But so my second question is, are the practices to realize these various levels of energy? And because you're speaking about kind of the subtle, intricate scientific process of the conversion down to different levels, it's beautiful. But the practices to achieve those, are those practices essentially the Kashmir Shaiva, for example, the practices of that tradition, or maybe of the Tibetan Buddhist or Taoist tradition that have developed practices in which there are the realizations of these levels of energy within the practitioner?
Okay, got it. Thank you for the question. So my understanding is that, well, back to your original question, is yeah, these energy levels are described, but they're not just in Shaivism, but they're not described in scientific terminology, and they're not really described in a way that people can really relate to be honest, because they're pretty exotic, esoteric descriptions, because that's the nature of the energy. But from a practical point of view, because I actually have been meditating and studying meditation for many years, what the traditional schools are lacking is the use of imagery, because they basically are saying, well, you just focus on put your consciousness in your pineal gland or your crown chakra or wherever, and then everything else just happens automatically. But I believe that specific imagery can be used to facilitate the process. And the imagery that I didn't really have time to go into, is like I said, visualize these mechanisms, visualize your DNA wrapping itself into a toroid, and that will facilitate the process. And then, so that's the second question. The first question is, are they Euclidean? The higher dimensions are not Euclidean, and do not obey the laws of Maxwell and Hertz in the electromagnetic world. So now there are descriptions that really go over my head about mathematical descriptions of 5D, 5-dimensional reality. Kaluza, Klein, for example, talk about the nature of the energies, and it's a whole different mathematics, and it's a whole different way of looking at energy. And as something I should go back and get a PhD in mathematical physics, and I might be able to understand this stuff. But for now, the short answer is that it's different kind of energy. It's non-Euclidean, if you want to put it in those terminology. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And in the chat, we have the paper by Barbieri that Dr. Josephson was mentioning earlier, if you would like to save that.
Oh,
And
cool.
then in the chat, we have a question from Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, would you like to unmute and share it, or would you prefer I can read it out from the chat too, if you'd like?
Okay, so I'm familiar with some schools of psychotherapy like internal family systems where the client focuses on a particular part of the body. And then through doing that, the client can access an emotion, an image, or an idea from that part of the body as a way of gaining insight into a mental or psychic state. Can you comment on what kind of physical energy mechanism can be involved here?
Sorry, could you elaborate? Involved here? Where?
Involved in the ability of a tissue of the body, like say a leg or a stomach or a throat, to be a place that gives insight into mental energy of thought, feeling, emotion, or image.
Whoa, that's quite a question. Well, a traditional neuroscientist would say it's the electrical energy associated with a thought that can do that, but they wouldn't associate that with an organ specifically. So to go from an organ, so the answer to that question is that, yeah, so clearly organs have electromagnetic fields associated with them. And the question then arises, are the higher dimensional energies that I referred to in my talk, are they present in the physical body, or are they only present in the higher dimensional bodies, like the light body or consciousness or the mind? And that's a very interesting question, actually. And there's some evidence, at least, that okay, the best example is the quantum processes that are now being observed in the body at the cellular level in the tissue. And if those quantum processes generate quantum fields, then we have quantum fields carrying the information, biochemical information, cellular information, carrying that information, and then the question is, well, where does it go? And it's either going to go up into the mind, where the mind can then utilize that information and create whatever it needs to create in the physical body, or it can go down into the molecular level and influence certain molecules like DNA and other molecules that have quantum properties. Microtubules, another example. So
or it could go up to the thought body. You were mentioning other bodies. So that's interesting to me, because if there's a connection between these other bodies, as in theosophical systems, with the physical body, maybe connecting through energies like the acupuncture energy or things like that, then you can see a circuit.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it enters into the acupuncture meridian system, then it can travel all over the entire body and cause, obviously, acupuncture does cause physical effects in the body. So that energy, whether it's electromagnetic or beyond electromagnetic, can clearly propagate throughout the whole body through the acupuncture meridian system. So you answered your own question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Rein.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson, for that question. Thank you. And I see we have one question in the chat from Professor Innocent Egbunike. on what will you say are the shared beliefs between science and the Bible?
Well, well, as I said in my introduction, the Bible would use the word God inside the body we're talking about, and scientists would use the word soul, except most scientists don't use that word. So maybe the word consciousness would be a word that would be used by a scientific community. But that's similar, if not identical, to what the Bible is talking about as a form of energy which controls everything in the body, our thoughts, our emotions, and our physicality. That's the short answer to that question.
Thank you, Dr. Rein. And would anyone else have any questions they would like to ask, or if any of our panelists too would like to add on?
Well, there's just one thing I could say that's completely different, which is that Luc Montagnier was doing these experiments on DNA, where he found a particular sound signals could do something to the DNA. I think he was rather hounded out of science for suggesting that. As was Ben Venist earlier.
Yeah. In fact, what's intriguing by Dr. Montagnier's work is that he was able to measure the energy, electromagnetic energy emitted by the DNA molecule. And when I confronted him about that, he said, well, yeah. I said, I want to continue that line of research. You want to collaborate? And he said, yeah, well, the problem with that is that it's not reproducible, which means to me that he observed the phenomena, but because it's kind of an etheric phenomena, it doesn't happen all the time. And you have to be in the right environment to be able to measure it. And so he thought it was just too complicated, and that our methods for measuring electromagnetic fields emitted from cells and molecules was just not sensitive enough to be able to, I mean, it's the same thing with biophotons. I mean, Pop was measuring biophotons from cells, but they're very, very weak. And, we barely can measure them. So as scientific validation for the idea, for example, that two cell types can talk to each other, or different brain regions can talk to each other via electromagnetic energy, in addition to chemicals.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so much to learn and so much we're gaining from all the questions and the insights. Would anyone else like to add on, or any other questions too? I want to make sure, open the floor if anyone. We do have some comments in the chat, so please check it out if you would like. I know we have an earlier comment and one now from Dr. Wilson. All right, I think if that's everyone and there are no further questions, we can go on to our next portion of the program. Thank you so much to everyone who asked a question, and to our panelists and Dr. Rein. Thank you so much for answering each of them so thoughtfully.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And so I will now transition into a brief proposal by the PWPA LA team, and then I will re-invite our panelists for a final discussion. Yes, so for our proposal, we would like to propose and examine what becomes possible when human consciousness is reconnected to the origin of consciousness, thereby renewing our relationship, humanity's relationship with nature. And we ask, what kind of new relationship between human beings and the natural world can emerge from this alignment? And how might it contribute to addressing the environmental crisis we face today? When we study natural systems, we observe that interactions between two entities sharing a common purpose often generate a greater output energy than the initial input. And let me share a few examples. First, in photosynthesis, through the exchange of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, plants produce glucose and oxygen, creating more usable energy than the initial input of light and matter. Second, in atmospheric and oceanic systems, warm air or water rises while cooler air or water sinks, forming convection currents. And these dynamic flows can be harnessed for energy, producing output energy that exceeds the initial heat input from the sun. And third, in geothermal systems, heat from the Earth's interior is converted into electrical energy, again with output far exceeding the thermal input. According to unification thought, the philosophical framework developed by the PWPA founders, this pattern is understood as a give and receive action, a process in which two entities interact in harmony toward a shared purpose, producing outcomes that are creative, regenerative, and expansive. And today we would like to explore whether this principle can be applied to the renewed relationship between human beings and nature to help restore our damaged natural world. The restorative power and potential of this principle can already be seen in both human beings and the natural environment. And so if we consider several examples of the regenerative principle embedded throughout nature, we can see, for example, in wetlands, often called the kidneys of the earth, host rich biodiversity and purify water by filtering pollutants and sediments before they reach rivers and oceans. They also store carbon, contributing significantly to global carbon sequestration. Phytoremediation shows us that certain plants like sunflowers, Indian mustard, and even corn can absorb and store heavy metals, naturally cleansing the soil and environment. And in marine ecosystems, especially coral reefs, we find a remarkable regenerative capacity. Through coral spawning, male and female corals release reproductive cells simultaneously, allowing reefs to renew themselves and maintain ecological balance over time. In a similar way, the potential within human beings is evident through our scientific discoveries and technological advancements. So once human consciousness is aligned, these capabilities may become a force that cooperates with nature's processes. And therefore, we would like to propose that a renewed relationship between human potential, expressed through science and technology, and nature's inherent self-healing power can form a new kind of give and receive relationship. Such a partnership may amplify our collective capacity to restore the earth, a collaboration between human creativity and nature's regenerative wisdom, grounded in a shared consciousness aligned with the origin of life itself. And so this is our proposal by PWPA LA very briefly, but we would like to go into panel discussion number 2 on the question, what are your initial thoughts or feedback on this proposal, and how might we translate it into real-world action? And so just like last time, if we can hear from each of our panelists, and then we'll open the floor for discussion, further discussion amongst our panelists. So if I can, re-invite up our panelists, thank you so much. And if we can go to Dr. Josephson, would you be able to share your response to this question and proposal?
Well, it's rather outside my field, really. As I said, my colleagues know more about it than me, so I don't know if I have much to say. I could have a look at my slides if I can find them, but it's not that helpful. Now, which one? Well, it's just something I prepared in advance, and I think I may have to. Well, that's really just talking about how I moved from physics to critical phenomena, and then how the brain works, paranormal phenomena, higher states of consciousness. I collaborated with, did a paper with Hermann Hauser, who a chap behind ARM, and about language acquisition, and then onto hyperstructure theory, which is how structures develop in developmental processes. And student George Osborne did a simulation, and in came to the conference. The department said, that's not physics, you can't continue with it. Then I got in touch with semiosis. So at the moment I'm collaboration with all these people, and it's Trevor and let me see if I can move this. Well, okay, I'll just look at it and say a paper by Karen Barrard, or a book actually by her on agential realism, which talks about how things, you have articulation and materialization, which work hand in hand. When you use a special system, apparatus, things can now be said in a particular context, and these lead to more of these systems, which in turn articulate. We'll also talk about sign theory. Well, okay, the point is symbolic signs are a special kind of sign which allows you to express things, and these there are ways in which these can develop, which I am going into. We're going into, and the idea is these can be trained to achieve things. So this is how we connect, we articulate, having developed this special kind of sign. So I think that's all I have to say under the circumstances.
Thank you so much, Dr. Josephson, for sharing. And yeah, we've been very interested in your mind matter unification project and all the work that's being done there. So thank you. And yes, thank you. And next, if I can invite up Dr. Keepin to answer this question on what are your initial thoughts or feedback on this proposal, and how might we translate it into real world action?
Well, I too feel it's a little out of my expertise area, but I do have a couple of reflections. One of which is this idea of extending physics to take biological factors into account. That same principle of extending science to take spiritual factors into account and extending our awareness to take ecological factors into a greater account than we have. This is my felt conviction, or maybe conviction's too strong, a hunch, that there, just as we have seen, there are many layers and levels of conscious awareness within the human being, and all these subtle levels of conscious realization that can be experienced through development of higher consciousness. If we approach the earth and the entire Gaian field as also having these dimensions, there are many dimensions to the living earth beyond what we normally perceive and beyond how we have perceived, particularly in our traditional Western kind of Newtonian Cartesian scientific understanding of the earth as a set of physical processes. And with that kind of a disconnection from the sacredness, if you will, or the subtle and spiritual dimensions of the earth, and really treating it as an object to be plundered for our own satisfaction and needs, and all of that, which we all understand, that kind of disconnect from the earth. My sense is that if we actually were to approach the earth as in the full mystery of a living being and begin to open ourselves to a level of symbiosis that has been lacking, that many of these environmental crises, that we begin to work with the natural systems of the earth, both the biological systems, physical systems, and consciousness systems, which are beyond our awareness normally, that I think we would enter into, applying that same principle you were speaking of, a remarkable accelerated healing of both humanity's relationship with the earth and healing of some of the ecological crises that we're facing. Because those crises are exacerbated by our human attitude of disconnection from the earth, which has been unfortunately in some ways reinforced by at least the classical scientific not so much a scientific viewpoint, but a set of dogmatic assumptions that have gone with that. And so if we reawaken and somehow begin to relate to the earth in the fullness of its multiple dimensions of being. I'll just give one simple example. When we walk out into the forest and we see all the trees, they all look separate. And we can cut one tree down and cart it off and think we've taken one of the separate trees away from all the other individual trees. But if we go underground, we see not only the interconnected roots of all the trees, but the whole mycelium network down there, an incredible, sophisticated and highly refined and intricate interconnection of all of these trees with one another that are constantly nurturing and supporting one another in different ways. And all of that is invisible to us above ground as we walk through the forest. So if we understand that the Earth's systems are also in that same level of complex interconnection, and as we would open to working with the Earth on all these multiple dimensions, as the kind of locus of our home as a human species, and transform our entire relationship with the earth, I have a sense that the environmental crises would rapidly be also transformed, that we would be working consciously with the kind of subtle energies and forces of the earth being, of the Gaian system, in a way that we are not now, that would greatly accelerate, based on this symbiosis that you're speaking to, greatly accelerate the solutions to these environmental challenges. That's my hunch. I don't have any proof for that. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keepin. Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And next,
actually, maybe I'll add one more moment, since it seems Dr. Rattan is not here at the moment, but he talks about soil and soul.
yes.
And that's really what I'm speaking about, is the marriage of soil and soul. If the human being really embraced that fully and saw the sacredness of the earth in its soil and in all of its biological systems, that through that symbiosis symbolized by the communion of soil and soul, we would rapidly transform the ecological crisis.
Yes, thank you so much. And I believe that as well. Yeah, Dr. Law let us know he had to go out earlier due to a busy schedule. But yes, thank you, Dr. Keepin. And next, we'd like to go to Dr. Jordan, if you would like to share your thoughts.
Thank you. You can hear me. I'm going to go outside here. The coffee shop's loud. So, when I talk about us as energy transformation systems, it embeds us in the energy entropy dynamics of all of reality. And the reason I say that is because the reason we're able to have 8.5 billion energy transformers called humans is because of the way we harness energy for the past millennia. And it's been a fairly extractive. And the future, I think, would require more mutually regenerating processes, where the way we organize ourselves in our world, the way we harvest energy from our context, simultaneously replenishes the systems that made that possible for us. I think this means it's going to be incredibly difficult for 8.5 billion people to live pumping the energy through them with the industrial type of systems we use to fuel human beings. I think we're going to see, if we make it, I think we're going to be smaller groups living much more like indigenous folks lived, with a more mutually regenerative relationship with the context in which we sustain ourselves. And that will be at what we'll call the chemical, biological, psychological, social levels. We will find ourselves, living, I would argue, with technology, an enhanced form of integration with our local context. And I think that happens on a smaller scale than we're living right now. So I hope that's an answer.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. Thank you. And thank you to our panelists for answering that question. And we want to have the space if any of our panelists would like to add on, or if any of our audience members would like to also add on to this question or have any thoughts on the proposal and how we might implement it. So we want to open the floor for that. So again, if you'd like to share, please raise your hand and yes, we can spotlight you. Dr. Hiroi has a comment he put in the chat. Dr. Hiroi, would you like to add on to this question and this topic?
Yes, I just want to clarify the facts because we are kind of diverting from original questions. In the first part also, why we need unification of science and religion, because both has good points and the shortcomings. By combining the scientific methodology with a larger scope of religion, including spiritual and God's, you know, world, they can do the much better job reaching the truth. And then about the second question, how to utilize this natural ecosystem and then also the Earth as a planet. Um, these days, extreme environmentalists, they, without studying the mechanism of 4.6 billion years of the Earth, they are doing extremely radical, like labeling CO2 as evil. But the CO2 is a clean gas that is necessary for life on the Earth. If you don't have CO2 down to like 0.01% or something, we are almost at the lowest level. So instead of targeting CO2, you should be more concerned about more toxic elements like NOx and other pollutions, especially from China. So taking care of the first, those things that is against natural cycle of elements. Luckily, we have land and ocean. Land weathers, absorbing carbon, right? And then plate tectonics also resupplying CO2 onto the Earth so that the atmosphere will not be deprived of carbon entirely. So this planetary scale and then collaboration with bioecology, uh, that is more to study. And instead of just 100 years of human cycle, we have to look at millions or even billions of years of this planet. So we shouldn't be pretending that we know everything and try to reduce CO2 in our, poor understanding of this planet. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Dr. Hiroi, for sharing and adding on. And yeah, thank you for your comments. I'm sorry I missed that earlier one, but thank you so much. And would anyone else like to add on, or if there is anything anyone wanted to, add on to this proposal or this discussion? Oh, yes, Dr. Davidson.
Yeah, nobody's suggesting that we get rid of all the CO2.
That's right.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. I guess first of all, I liked a lot of what Dr. Hiroi just said, and absolutely, there's no question that CO2 is part of the natural cycle of carbon, which is clearly essential to life on the planet, and so the problem here is with the distribution of carbon and the distribution and the form of carbon. The fact that if we have too much of the carbon in the form of CO2 and too much of that CO2 in the atmosphere, then we have a problem with the transmission of the traditional electromagnetic energy coming from the sun and radiating out from the earth. And that's, of course, just the traditional understanding of climate change. But I wanted to relate this idea to the proposal that you mentioned, Jasmine. And you know, as a scientist, I guess as a scientist who focuses on the traditional forms of energy, which is the electromagnetic energy, one argument is that, well, photosynthesis was believed for a long time to be a violation of the second law of thermodynamics because it looked like it looked like nature was actually generating energy. And then it became apparent that the problem was the boundaries around which or the boundaries that we draw around our system, which is the Earth. We have to draw the boundaries around both the sun and the Earth because photosynthesis is simply changing one form of energy to another, and that transformation cannot be 100% efficient. It has to be less than 100%, which it is when you include the energy loss. This is electromagnetic energy loss from the sun. And so I guess a scientist could argue that we're not generating a greater output energy than the initial input, but this is just in terms of electromagnetic energy now. We are actually transforming energy from one form to another, and in doing so, we are converting high concentration energy to low concentration energy or energy loss, which we cannot use in any meaningful way because that energy is so dilute. So we're taking this is all about entropy, right? What we're doing is we're starting with a low entropy and we're ending up with a higher entropy as we have to, according to the second law of thermodynamics. So I thought about that concept when you were talking about a proposal using the words that were generating a greater output energy than the initial input. I think a scientist would argue with that and saying we just have to draw our boundaries far enough so that we're including all the sources of energy that come into the system. And in this case, the system is the planet Earth, and we have to enlarge the boundaries to include the sun. But that entropy always is going to increase, and the concentration of energy is always going to decrease. And again, this is simply for traditional electromagnetic energy. So that's my comment, and I would love to hear people's reactions to that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson. And yes, would there like to be any responses or comments in addition to that? If not, it's something we can also all think about and take with us too. But I do want to leave space if anyone would like to add or share. Oh.
If I could follow up on Dr. Davidson's insight, we have created over the course of evolution, or as Bertrand Russell said, we've turned more and more Earth into life, and it's been through what Dr. Davidson calls energy transformation. And what we've done by not looking at ourselves as entropy generators and instead labeling salvation as some kind of transcendent space that's acontextual and has no entropy, we've avoided entropy. And we've avoided the cost of the planet of us being here. So, plus, let's just make it clear, we got 4 billion years to get out of here, or the sun goes supernova. Okay, so these kind of basic scientific facts, there are certain forms of spirituality that I feel actually cultivate an avoidance of our system, or of our existence as embodiments of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. and the fact that we are natural point destroyers and living systems break things down. They have to. That's what they are. So embracing that idea and then coming to grips with it and letting us try to better manage the multiple scales of energy, our entropy, our being necessarily creates, gives us a way to examine human suffering. I'll stop. I appreciate the comment, and I think that's consistent with how I would look in terms of going forward. Comment on your proposal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. And we also had an additional comment in the chat from Dr. Hiroi about, he said, indeed, Earth absorbs solar energy of 6,000 plus K temperature and emits the same energy at 300 K, which is higher entropy than absorbed, which is how Earth discards its increasing entropy. Entropy viewpoint is more important than the temperature issue. Thank you. And again, we want to make space. Yeah, would anyone like to add on, or are there any further comments that anyone would like to make? All right, sounds good. Thank you for the insightful discussion that took place, and thank you for all your feedback and thoughts, and thank you so much. So if we can give one more round of applause to all of our panelists, our speaker for today, and then also for all of our audience members too. Thank you for your engagement and participation in creating this important dialogue that I think will continue to be an ongoing one as we further develop and expand on this discussion. But I want to again thank everyone also for joining. I know for many of you, this is your life's work and research, and we highly respect that. And we really want to thank you for taking the time to share that with us. And so before we close out, I would like to invite up for our concluding remarks, our PWPA International President, Dr. Thomas Selover. He is also the co-coordinator of IAAP, the International Association of Academicians for Peace, and he has a doctorate in comparative religion and East Asian philosophy from Harvard University, and has taught for over 25 years at universities and colleges in Canada, the US, as well as in China and Korea. So we can welcome up Dr. Selover for our concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, and thank you to all of our highly distinguished panel. On behalf of the PWPA International family, I want to thank everyone who's participated in this activity for sharing your highly cultivated consciousness with us, with all of us, through your learned presentations and also actually through the discussion together. We are edified by this spiritual discussion among scientists, and you have induced a somewhat higher consciousness among all of us. And for that, we are very grateful, and we want to somehow keep a bit of the atmosphere of this discussion as we go about our work in our respective fields. And particularly for the deeper dive that Dr. Rein presented to us. And we know that each one of the panelists could take a deeper dive with us. So we're looking forward to more opportunities to share together. The hope of the PWPA founders, Dr. Samyang Moon, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, since the beginning in 1973, is that through this kind of give and receive process, we can stretch our own consciousness one by one, and at the same time, and in the process, to stretch what we might colloquially call to stretch our hearts. Our ability to resonate with one another, our ability to resonate with our environment, to resonate with the earth around us, and in so doing, be able to make progress, as in the PWPA proposal that Desmond presented. We are on the way to bringing this higher sense of consciousness into social processes that we're involved with together, which include the kinds of things that social scientists talk about. How do we bring this consciousness into that, into a kind of fellow consciousness, we can say, fellowship consciousness? And in that regard, we are resonating with, as we call, our source, we can even personalize that source under some conditions to speak about Heavenly Parent. That is to say, the kinship among all of us in various forms that we experience the more we get to become familiar with each other, not only in this group, but actually with our fellow humans and actually with our fellow beings in this cosmos. So, with that said, there's a lot of homework for the up and coming generation of scientists and articulators of this perspective. And so there's a lot of food for thought, and we thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Selover, for that heartfelt message. Thank you so much. And yes, thank you again. And before we conclude, I just wanted to make a few final announcements. And that's, please look forward to our hybrid conference. We host it annually, where we come together as PWPA LA and the PWPA family, and it will be in June of 2026. We will make sure to send you all an invitation when it draws near, but we hope that this can be an ongoing conversation that we can continue to have as we navigate how to solve the different challenges we're facing on our Earth today. And we also have recently published our first publication as PWPA LA on a solution guide entitled An Innovative Solution for Environmental Issues. Our proposal is actually based on this publication, and we are asking for feedback. So if you are willing to help, if you can help us, please let us know, or if you would like to receive the book, please let us know. And yes, we can get that book to you. Otherwise, if you scan here, it's also available on Amazon. But also, please contact us. We would love to stay in touch with all of you. We hope that we can continue this partnership and cooperation, and we would love to support the various work that you're doing as well. So you can go to our website, pwpla.org, for more of our content or to subscribe to our newsletter. And we look forward to working together with you on this important endeavor to unite religion and science, and also understanding consciousness so that we can address and resolve the many issues facing our world today. So thank you again for joining us today. And for our Zoom audience, we're going to ask if you can stay on for a group photo. But for all of those joining us via live stream, thank you so much for joining us today. And this officially wraps up our program. Thank you for being here and sharing this time with us.